back. Let's get that intro one more time.
Yeah. I think we should have 4 countdowns. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Crumbling podcast. We're a podcast where we introduce ourselves a second time in the night just because we're recording this as a podcast, but also some people are watching it live. So if the intro seems a little confusing, it's because we got to do that for the people who are listening to this podcast on the podcast apps and stuff. Yay. I'm Sophia Florence. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Andrew Hillary. In addition to this podcast, I'm a person with a job, and we are here today to talk about labor. And, I've heard rumors that labor is like, that's like job stuff. So I think it's all one thing, it's all one thing.
Yeah. And so we're joined tonight by Kim Kelly, who was with us for the last episode. Kim, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
My name's Kim Kelly. I'm a labor reporter and author from Jersey. I live in Philly. I put out a book called Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor a couple years ago. I have the kids version coming out on May 6th, and I'm trying very hard to suppress my terrible regional accent. Let's see how bad I do.
Let it fucking rip, okay? We're all friends
all
here.
Right, yo, ball, let's go down to park. Bring a hoagie, go and see the birds.
Let's go, dude. Well, in my neck of the woods, we're going to get some Iron City. We're going to see Stellars, but that's okay.
Right. And we're here with 3 wonderful labor journalists. So we'll introduce you guys one at a time. Steve Mooser, why don't you go first?
Apologize. First, I don't have the ability. I may think I have a big head at times, but it seems I'm taking up the whole screen here. But my name's Steve Moser. I am retired health and safety director of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, very active in the New Haven Labor History Association, and Connecticut, which is the Connecticut version of National Kosh Groups. Dedicated my life to workplace health and safety. Love to pick up on a couple things that Kim especially was talking about earlier.
So next we've got Steve Thornton.
Hi, I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. I was a union organizer for 40 years. I'm retired now, and I mostly do some union trainings, and I write books. The latest book that I've written with a really great guy, Andy Pasek, is called Radical Connecticut People's History in the Constitution State. And basically, it's history from below.
Cool. So many authors on this podcast. I write a lot of tweets. That's basically the same thing if you add it all up, right?
No.
Come on.
All right. And so last we've got Henry Snow. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah. Am I coming through? I know we've had some technical difficulties.
You sound amazing.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm a labor historian. I write about how workers and their bosses from the late 1600s to the present have sort of constructed competing ideas of politics, economics, and I have a book out about that next year. It'll be out on May 26th, 2026. It's called Control Science. It will also have a subtitle, but we're not sure. We're still working on exactly what that's going to be after some last minute changes. So, there's a good chance that by the time you're listening to this, maybe you can even pre-order that book now, but who knows? But for now, it's a thing that exists in the future. I also read about people who make wooden ships in the 1700s and port workers and some stuff like that. So, yeah.
That is fascinating. I want to derail this whole thing and talk about ships, but I know we shouldn't.
Hey, I only know about the one ship. What is it? What's the ship that they took apart and then it's
the one ship?
The ship of Theseus?
Yeah, that's the ship I know. Let's talk about that. That is the beginning and the end of my ship knowledge. And if I'm being honest, I'm not even entirely sure if it's the same ship anymore.
So you're not sure if it is the one ship?
It could be multiple ships.
Any ship could be multiple ships, really.
It's true.
Look, it's all about perspective.
Right. So we're going to do this as a panel. Myself and Andrew are going to ask questions. My first question. So yesterday I got a chance to meet Steve Moser and we chatted for a second about workplace safety as he brought up before. And I wanted to bring it up again because I have a serious interest in that myself. Like as a chemical engineer who's seen and been in a couple of industrial accidents, this is a topic that kind of lives in my bones. So tell us what got you interested in workplace safety, and also would love to hear everybody else's thoughts on this. This isn't just for Steve, but it is for Steve.
Well, I guess Cesar Chavez was the first one. I worked with the farm workers in the late 60s, just when they were realizing the hazardous chemicals that farm workers are exposed to, especially the organophosphate chemicals, which are like nerve gas. So that kind of was, I went to a college. That was my first Antioch college job. We alternated between work and study. And so that became a focus. I started focusing my work that I did, my academic work, and then continued, had a friend, Steve Watka, who some of you may have heard of. He was, among other things, he worked for OCW, Tony Mazzocchi, and that was the connection I made. And Tony Mazzocchi was a very significant influence, not only for me, but for a lot of people who went into workplace health and safety. We who are kind of middle class, we were, educators or, people became lawyers, industrial hygienists, doctors, committed to use our skills to help working people be safe at work. And Tony Mazzocchi was an incredible union leader. And Steve Watka was actually the individual who was going off to meet Karen Silkwood when she got murdered in Oklahoma with the material that she had against Kerr McGee and what they were doing with Ross and so forth. So from there, I just, continued doing work. And I worked as the researcher on a film called Song of the Canary, which captured two different groups. One was a group of agricultural chemical workers in the Valley in California. And it was fascinating in a lot of ways because we were documenting different things that they were concerned about, nosebleeds, things like that. And then it came out more from the women than from the men. We're kind of young and we're trying to have kids, and it's not happening. And lo and behold, we were in the middle of making this film. I said, well, we've got to get these guys tested. So they got into a lab, and a lot of them had no sperm or, very low levels. And it turned out that they were working with a chemical called DBCP, which they didn't have any information about. It was this occidental chemical. And that was the cause of the problem. That chemical then it became national news. And after the fact, people were saying, gee, we ought to do more investigation of these kind of things. The other part of that film was about brown lung, folks who were working in the textile industry in the South and the problems that they were having as well. So that got me interested in the medical things. I went on to work. We started a workers' clinic at San Francisco General Hospital. Then I worked at the Yale Occupational Medicine program for a number of years, and then Mount Sinai for a number of years. And then I had the opportunity to move on to work for an international union, the RWDSU. And so I've committed my life to educating and learning. It's interesting because I'd go out to workplaces and talk to workers. And oh, you must be the expert. I said, no, I'm not the expert. I know some things about OSHA law and things like that. You're the experts. And that was the direction that I took the whole time. If I want to know about what's going on, the people who know that the best are the people who do the job. And looking to the future, really, a lot of what we know about health and safety, the big things were asbestos and lead and things like that. But I realized one of the biggest issues that were coming up, especially with the folks in RWDSU, were a whole range of things that OSHA didn't have standards on. There were problems. And basically, my position was, and continue to be, anything that impacts on people's health, their physical health or their psychological health, is an occupational health hazard. So that includes wage theft, includes inability to get childcare, it includes forced overtime, and a number of other issues like that. So one of the campaigns we had was with car wash workers in New York. And I had a lot of successful campaigns organizing them. And you kind of think, well, these folks had documentation issues and they had really bad conditions. They worked in places where, unlike what's supposed to happen, they were working with chemicals that they didn't get trained on. And, the boss would say, oh, go, use the pink stuff. And they were an incredibly strong group. And that was very, very inspiring to me. And I think in terms of the future, keeping the health and safety movement going relies on being very aware of the variety of things, the job uncertainty, all the other issues that are psychological stressors, in addition to all the unregulated things like doing repetitive work, the pace of work, how work is organized. These are all workplace health and safety issues. And that's what I think, I hope we focus on in the future, that it's not just measuring something in the air. Sometimes I think occupational health, though, it's very technical. No, it's not. It's tracking down what it is that happens to you when you go to work and doing the best we can to reduce that or to prevent the exposure if we can.
Yeah, and as somebody who spends most of their time driving around in a very old van with a lot of sharp edges and no seatbelts, I know a lot about workplace hazard. There are also just some wires that are live wires that are just dangling. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I would say for most people, you're not going to run into. I'm having workplace hazards that most people haven't experienced in a generation. Like I'm on the cutting edge of what people were fighting to get rid of in the 80s. Like I'm living it. I'm basically, the ice cream truck is a time machine. That's where I'm going to land on that. Thank you for that, Miss Steve Mooser. Now is it Mooser or Moser?
Moser.
Thank you.
Roosevelt or Roosevelt?
I do not address the Roosevelts.
Theodore went for Roosevelt and Franklin went for Roosevelt. So
my next question is for another Steve. This is for Steve Thornton. I would like to ask you if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about your book, Radical Connecticut. Like what inspired you to write it, and what lessons from your book do you think could be taken from the Connecticut labor movements and applied broadly?
Okay. Thanks for having me on with these very, very interesting folks. I have to say that when I was in high school, I was a child in the 60s, and I rejected everything I learned in high school, especially the history. It held no interest for me. I did not want to know about a lot of other old white guys who did amazing things and built amazing buildings. And so I went along a couple of years like that. But then I read a book by Herbert Apteker, and then another book of the American Revolution, and then Labor's Untold Story. And both those books together showed me an entirely different world, an entirely different universe where working people were sacrificing and winning, and where working people had to come together. Even though they were ordinary people, they were doing extraordinary things.
I always do think it's incredible how many of the things that we have that are just a normal part of our lives, like basic workplace protections, 40-hour work, the concept of a weekend, that didn't just happen. Like people fought and died for those kind of things. And you're right. We don't maybe they'll talk about there was labor in the 1920s and then everything was fine. Like that's kind of how school goes. Like whenever they explain it, they're like, yes, there were some riots, but then everybody probably shared a Coke or something, Oh,
I had the same experience. I read Labor's Untold Story when I was a senior in college, a class that we had right at the end. And, we didn't have any information about unions. And unfortunately, that's still the case. I think probably there are more people who read Glenn Beck's chapter about how bad unions are than got any meaningful.
Speaking of Connecticut.
Yeah,
did anybody else just feel a chill up their spine? That's the Glenn Beck chill. What's up?
KC 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know he used to host a radio show, like a morning show in Connecticut?
Yeah.
Did he do the
happens in
traditional
Connecticut.
morning show, the prank calls, or was it still the Glenn Beck stuff?
No, it was it was like a regular morning show.
Wow.
It's the one that I grew up listening to. I actually met him when I was 7, and I didn't have an understanding that the people that hosted the morning shows on radio stations weren't famous people. And so I had actually gotten his autograph on a Burger King crown, and I wish that I still had it because it's the most absurd thing that I've ever kind of come into possession of.
Anyway, I think that's still a problem that people don't know enough about labor. And, looking at the history of Amazon, too, I mean, the union that I had been with, I actually had retired before the whole Bessemer campaign down in Alabama, but a lot has been said about how that campaign was run, and there are a lot of problems with it. But they have to recognize the good things about Staten Island is that, people knew people, they had family members, relatives, unions were pretty familiar. Not so much down in Alabama. And that is something that people have to get accustomed to what a labor union is because they're not exposed to the information as they grow up.
Next, we've got a question for Henry. I figured we'd get you guys, kind of a question each that was just for you guys, and then we'll kind of go into more roundtable questions. But for Henry, so we know that things have been pretty rough for people in academia recently, what with a lot of pressure from the administration leaning in that direction, especially, defunding research grants and things like that. In light of that, do you feel like there might be labor movements brewing more among teaching and research professionals? And also, what's the experience been like for you?
I'd like to hope so, right? I mean, there's a lot of radicalism among grad students, among contingent faculty, right? Adjuncts. So I think on the one hand, I see a lot of radicalism and struggle there already, and I think that's great. I think the structure of the university itself presents a lot of problems for making that organizing as impactful as we'd like it to be. We've got sort of different departments and wings within a university have their own different material interests and goals, and organizing across those can be very powerful. And that's one reason why actually I think, administration's attack on biomedical research and things like that is something where, I hope we can help some of our colleagues in science. We've already been facing a restricted funding environment in new ways, and maybe this is an opportunity for solidarity. Ideally, hopefully, the administration is creating conditions for a broader solidarity within the university. There's still a lot of, structurally, one of the problems that comes with universities is that, what a lot of our research is it can be a sort of a lonely endeavor, right? I have colleagues who I work with really, whose work I really appreciate and know, but at the end of the day, when I'm writing my work, sure, you have a workshop every once in a while, but your book is your book. It's a lot of working very hard on your own quietly, and that breeds a kind of individualism, even if that's not somebody's actually politics. So I think getting away from that, I think, will be important too. But I see a lot of support, again, from younger faculty, grad students, and from our own students themselves who want a better labor environment, not just for their teachers, but for themselves, and understand the stakes that we face there. So I hope that administrations will start to maybe take some cues from their own staff and faculty in that regard. There's cause for cautious optimism long term amidst the doom here. Yes, absolutely.
I do think that there's something you said there that is an interesting, maybe it's tough to in the face of what's going on right now, look for a silver lining. The one thing that I do kind of see is that this Doge, almost just blanket approach to we need to destroy as many things as possible. What that actually kind of could potentially do is at least create the conditions for solidarity. If we are all being squeezed in these different walks of life, if we're all being squeezed the same way, there is a very small window of us to be hey, wait a minute, we're kind of all in this together and it's us against them. You know what? I actually have no hope for this, but it is there.
I think you're totally right. And I have an example that might give you a little bit of hope for that actually too. So this is from my other, I have two books that are probably coming out next year. The other one's in peer review, so I don't have a deadline, or I don't have a publication date for you. But this is some work I'm doing on the American Revolution, which, there's been in the last few years a lot of public conversation rethinking, a lot of the elite leadership of the revolution are slaveholders. They're invested in land speculation. And all of that's true, right? But you wouldn't have had a revolution without those people. It's a very broad movement that includes a lot of different people with a lot of different interests. And there's possibilities for positive change in that. So in particular, when you learn about the Tea Party and if you're in Rhode Island, the Gaspee Affair, and some of these other sort of radical protests in the 1760s and 1770s, they're a strange coalition where you can simultaneously have merchants who are profiting off of, the proceeds of slavery, but also enslaved mariners, working not necessarily directly together, but against a common enemy. And that is bleak and difficult, but it directly creates some of the political conditions for, say, abolition in the North, specifically because of the sort of coalition building you see among radical maritime workers, sort of taking advantage of the fact that there are wealthy elites who have their own different set of grievances against a kind of incompetent administration. So if given America itself, for all of its many problems, some of the best of early America is born out of exactly this kind of crisis, I do think there's room there to deal with an administration that breaks everything and to, rebuild that in a way that better suits the interests of working people, not just sort of in immediate material terms, but really structurally rethinking what America is and what it can be.
It's very unfortunate that extreme adversity gives opportunities.
Yes.
If only we didn't have to suffer to get there. Well, here we are. So our next question, this is kind of for everybody. What advice would you have, maybe just a general advice for people building new unions? What historical examples would you hold up, giving them some ideas to do things differently, or even some successful strategies that they did in the past and haven't really been tried again?
I'll take a stab at it. I think that if I had to pick one profession, it would be teaching, because I think the Chicago labor movement teachers union showed that with really good organization, you can do just about anything. They just won a contract, or a tentative contract, the other day. And I think that the teachers have a little more flexibility than, say, somebody who's behind the cash register or somebody who's on the factory floor.
Yeah, they already have a bit of the actual union infrastructure built in. Wasn't it maybe 8 or 10 years ago that like the teachers union in, I want to say like Missouri, or like it was definitely some like much more red state. West Virginia.
Yeah, it was West Virginia.
We're like a union in a state that is a very conservative place, that just the act of acting within solidarity, you can get things done even when I don't imagine a union has many friends in the West Virginia State Assembly. So I like that, you know, to look at what teachers have done and been able to accomplish in places where it makes less sense that they would be able to do that.
One of the little examples I always like to bring up, it's less, well, this is strike specific, but it works for organizing in general. Bear with me. Back in 1946, sugarcane plantations were the big business in the Hawaiian Islands. And they were owned by Anglos who lived on the mainland or lived in the islands. And they were worked by native Hawaiians as well as tons of immigrant workers from Korea and China, Japan, the Philippines, all over the place, really. And surprise, surprise, they had a pretty tough time out there in the fields. They weren't treated properly. They weren't paid properly. And the workers themselves were segregated by the bosses. They lived in separate camps. So Chinese workers lived here, Japanese workers lived here, etc. They were paid different amounts at a different pay scale. And all of that was done to avoid any sense of solidarity or community growing between the different groups of workers. That was something the bosses used to their advantage when conflict broke out or labor action broke out. For example, bring in Filipino workers to be strike breakers on a Japanese break, vice versa. But in 1946, when it came time to negotiate a new union contract, they were the ILWU, International Longshore and Warehouse Workers Union, who are a very cool union, very dope history. The organizers realized, okay, this time, like we can't allow them to divide us like that. That weakens us. That's how we lose. And they just really went above and beyond to ensure that every worker of every language and every background, every nationality was included, felt they were understood and respected. They started these strike kitchens where workers would cook for one another and trade recipes. They brought in community leaders to act as strike stewards. They ensured that there were translators at every meeting to ensure that people could understand what was going on and no one felt like they were left in the dark. And all those efforts came to fruition in a massive strike, 20,000 plantation workers and their friends and families. So like 50,000 people in total hit the streets. They were on strike. I can't remember for quite how long. They were strike for a little while, but they won the highest raise they gotten in 20 years. And they did that because they embraced the diversity of the workforce. They ensured that every worker...
Let's just call it what it is. They went woke.
They woke up. They went woke. They had translators. They had all kinds of people in the kitchen. But like just emphasizing that our differences are a strength instead of a weakness. Steve mentioned the Amazon labor union folks at Staten Island before. They used that same strategy when they were organizing. They shared food in the parking lot. They had people who spoke different languages organized in different groups of workers. They understood like we have a big diverse workforce. We can't just cater to or try to organize one section because that's how we're going to fall. And I think that's just something worth emphasizing, whether it's with new unions or older unions who are struggling to properly serve and organize their members. It's like allowing yourselves to be divided and just doing the boss's work for him.
I agree. And, you know, I will say the one thing that gives me pause is I feel like given the current climate, if we are able to convince enough people that diversity is in fact a strength, I feel like if I keep saying that, I'm going to end up in a Salvadoran prison like pretty soon. Like I feel
you already have tattoos, so you're already halfway there, but we're not doing great on that.
Need to get some long sleeve shirts.
And if they send you to that Salvadoran prison, you know, you can use your lessons about building a union there too, because one of the well, look, I mean, they're doing a lot of.
There's a long history of incarcerated workers organizing.
Yeah, they're doing a lot. They are being forced to do work there, and I think one of the things that I mean, building a little bit on what Kim was saying, right? That not just now, but in your previous episode that you were just recording before this too, that there are a lot of different ways to form a union and to organize, and we're gonna have to get creative in an era where they're sort of paralyzing the NLRB like this. And one thing that Capital knows very well is you can just do things. You don't need permit. Like, and when I say you don't need permission, I don't mean that automatically doing things that are against the rules is always going to work out. But I mean mean being able to get creative, and whether that's understanding that, like, you know, a union isn't this outside structure that exists hypothetically. It's a union is your friend, your pals, and your relationships with your coworkers. So in Zambia in the 1950s and 1960s, there's an attempt by bosses to split the certain skilled workers within the mine workers union of Zambia into a separate sort of additional. They're trying to recreate a tier system in order to take some of the workers who would have been the most promising labor leaders out of the movement and sort of split workers' interests. And one of the ways that they try to push back on that happening is that ordinary mine workers begin shaming the sort of other workers and trying to say, you know, you shouldn't join this other union. Their other kids start making fun of the other guy's kids, and they make up mocking songs about them that they sing in the schoolyard. And you know, they're pretty effective. This union goes on to become powerful enough that it plays a pretty pivotal role in ending white minority rule in what was then the Northern Rhodesia and later becomes Zambia. And so you can just do things. You have to do them thoughtfully. You have to do them carefully, but you don't need to wait for some outside organization or set of rules to give you permission. You can stop work if it's a careful, thoughtfully considered plan. You can work together with your colleagues to do all kinds of things. That's how we got unions in the first place. Before there was a time when they weren't a thing.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. All right, let's move on. Oh, Sophia, you got the next question. Why don't you take this ball out of my hand before I break the backboard?
All right. So, we have a lot of DSA folks listening in. And so, I thought I'd get your guys' thoughts on this. So you've got groups like DSA that are becoming more active in the labor movement and electoral politics, while simultaneously kind of being outside of the whole thing, right? Like the DSA is not itself a union, it is not itself a party. What do you think are the benefits of that strategy? And what do you think groups like DSA can do to, help improve on the labor movement even more?
I think DSA has a really special role to play. Political and radical political groups have done since the Socialist Labor Party at the beginning of the 20th century and on up. And their job is to agitate. Their job is to educate. Their job is to provide some of the mobilization and a lot of the physical effort that it takes to get a union campaign going or to win a strike. And I think if DSA can actually come up with some clear objectives, don't bite off more than you can chew, but don't just make it words. I think we will have a stronger labor movement because we'll have a lot of folks rooting for us as well as working with us.
I think whether it's DSA or other groups need to really encompass folks that they want to work with. They have to be there supportive and not just with a separate agenda. But one of the things that Kim wrote in her book was the whole struggle down in Alabama, where people were working together. They were supporting each other. And too often, I think, you really have to throw yourself into it if you're going to work with a group. And, the shit's happening all over the place. I mean, it's very clear. There's so many jobs that are being cut. People are in need. And in those situations, people have to be ready to support, not just with kind of political views, but with helping on a real basic level, become a part of their lives to help them with things that they're going to encounter being unemployed. It's very clear what's happening. I mean, this is a message that's going out. You resist what Trump wants, you are a national security threat. It's kind of an image that you have to really challenge. And the only way we're going to do that is to really become vocal and support each other.
Yeah, if I can jump in this question too. So I think there are two really great roles that DSA can play that we've seen historical sort of activists play in this context. And the first is on labor, and then I guess I'll talk about electoral politics. But in a labor sense, I think one of the obvious historical precedents here is Communist Party organizers in the early 20th century, whom the Communist Party of the United States was never that large. It's shockingly large compared to people who don't know about it might think. But what it mostly was a force multiplier where you could, count on members of the Communist Party, especially at its height or at particular key moments, to get involved with existing union efforts, to continually push them in an effective direction. I'm thinking about one particular figure I've written a little bit about, and his name is Karl Marzani, a really interesting guy with a colorful life and a 4-volume autobiography, which is nuts. I think like 6 people read it. In the 40s, one of the things he does after he gets out of working for the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA, after the end of the war, he takes the sort of filmmaking experience he had there and puts it to work on behalf of unions. So he forms a film outlet that makes films in particular for the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers, the UE, and you can go actually find it's in 2 parts on the Internet Archive. You can go find his work, Deadline for Action, which is a 1946 film trying to intervene in congressional elections there on behalf of unions and the New Deal. And it's a really interesting example of what sort of a committed activist working with labor can do. He's got interviews with UE leadership at the time. And then I think relatedly, something that DSA can do is parties in the US are weird. They have very limited ability to police their membership or their ballot lines. You know, most of the things that you would call a party in other countries are illegal in the United States in terms of things that the Democratic Party can actually do. And that's actually an opportunity. So sometimes you'll hear people on the left say, well, we need to abandon the Democrats. But a lot of ordinary voters recognize that in a first past the post system, you only have two options. But the Democrats, they don't exist, right? That's an institution. There's a fundraising apparatus, but almost anybody, you know, if they can win a primary, right, can be a quote unquote Democratic candidate. So what organizations like DSA can do is do the kind of centralism and organizing that a political party itself actually can't, and also ideally push things in a more sort of effective and progressive direction. So I think activists embedded within and working, not trying to lead, but trying to change the world with workers and the labor movement can really accomplish a lot, and have in the past.
Henry raises a really good point, especially with the film industry, and how culture has played a progressive role in union organizing. Not so much these days, but back in the first part of the 20th century, the only way you got your point across was on the stage in terms of your culture or through song.
If it wasn't for unions, half of folk music wouldn't exist.
That's right. The International Lady Garment Workers Union staged a Broadway show, musical, that was very popular. And it toured, and it had a lot of fans in New York. And it was reflecting people's lives back to them in a really, nice way. I mean, in a way that made them feel good. And there are a lot of other examples of that where I don't think labor ever broke into television, and very, very rarely into film. But there were certain aspects of theatrical plays that, actually helped educate people.
I like it. Also, I just wanted to circle back to Henry. You were talking about what was the guy that you were talking about?
Karl Marzani.
Yeah, well, whenever we have a quota to hit, so I do have to just touch on this. Whenever you said that he had a 4-volume autobiography, you did not also have to tell me he was Italian. I could have figured that out by context. Yeah. We do have an anti-Italian quota to hit. I'm so sorry. I had to circle back to get that one in, but I do want to move on.
As an Italian American.
I've worn you down. I have... My next question. So in one of the last presidential primaries, a specific union cited their healthcare plan as being a reason to why they wouldn't back a presidential candidate that was pushing for a more universal healthcare model. What do you think would be a good strategy for getting folks like that on board with a healthcare model that, insofar as it would be better for everyone and likely even better than their specific current healthcare plan?
I tell you, they should just go and talk to workers in New York City. They've had a Medicare Advantage plan that was kind of rammed down their throats because it was cheaper for the city of New York to pay for that than to actually pay for Medicare. And they just got that overturned. That's extraordinary. It's not going to make any headlines, really, for a very long time. But it was extraordinary because they knew how Medicare Advantage was just another way to squeeze workers and give them less than quality health care. The fact that this is just so fresh history right now, I think people really should take a look at it.
And I know which union you're kind of subtweeting. Not for
I did not write the question. I have no idea who I'm talking about.
Well, say not for nothing, they have a really good health insurance plan. And I'm not like a single payer expert. I would like to see it. But I would say when it comes to those questions, I think so much the burden sort of lies on that alternative. Like, okay, if we're going to magically have single payer tomorrow, this is how it's going to be better than what you have, or at least as good at what you have. It's unfortunate, but healthcare benefits are kind of a big part of union contracts. It's something that unions have to fight for all the time. If we had single payer, they wouldn't have to spend that energy, which is another good reason why it would be helpful. There's been so much kind of propaganda, really, and disinformation about government-funded healthcare, about how it's supposedly so terrible, even though so many other developed countries are, well, they have it.
I've only ever had one union job. I worked at a grocery store that was union whenever I was like a teenager. So I didn't know what the fuck was going on. But I have had other jobs. I worked in a call center. I worked there for 10 years. Every single year, our healthcare plan got worse. What I would notice is that there would be a period in January where for a week, they would have meetings with us explaining to us all the ways that our new healthcare plan was worse than the last one. And like, this is obviously something that in a union, there's more protections. There's more people advocating for the workers. But just overall, what a bad system. You're taking 1 week out of 52 to just have to tell everybody why bad news about their healthcare every single year. It's just, and I mean, again, I know that in a union, these things are multi-year contracts and there is a more equitable, but like just overall, it's like, I mean, there are going to be examples where particular people are getting better treatment, but like, again, we're looking for solidarity. We're looking for the entire working class to benefit.
Yeah, that's the dumb and thrust of it. Like, this is stupid. It's true. And it's unfortunate and disappointing when folks who should understand that, and I'm sure do understand that, feel like they're torn between, I need something that we bargained for, that my family depends on. I don't know if I can trust whatever this government alternative is, because when's the last time a government program was as helpful or good or beneficial as it was promised to be? It's scary, right? Because as much as we care about solidarity, as much as you care about your union, you're still a human who has fears and medical problems and people that depend on you. So I kind of get why sometimes personal self-preservation trumps solidarity. We just need to get past that by making sure that alternative being offered is actually good. You know, like you can't ask somebody to jump if there's nothing to catch them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I agree with that completely. You remember this was a big issue in the Obama election, and back and forth was a promise about you workers who've worked out your Cadillac health insurance plan. We can't really go. I mean, they made a promise to labor that they weren't going to do that, and then they backtracked on it. We need the best plan out there, whether it's Cadillac or whatever you call it. That's what we need to make sure that everybody gets access to.
And I think one way we can convince people on this is understanding that if everybody is on the same health insurance plan nationally, it's very hard for it to suck because a lot of people are going to get very angry if it does. But also right now, those healthcare benefits come from unions have to work really hard to get those. And they put a cap on how many other benefits unions can get. So if you're a teachers union, for example, like because of how locally funded education is in the US, there's a hard limit on how much they could possibly pay you without additional political agitation. And of course, we should make that higher. Teachers are wildly underpaid. But in a world where the federal government, which critically does not have a zero-sum funding the way states and localities do. The federal government can run deficits. Deficits are good. They're not subject to the same kind of budgetary constraints as everything else. When the federal government is taking care of healthcare, that frees up a lot of money that you can bargain with, whether your employer is a private institution or the state or your local town. That money can go toward you straight up as wages. That can mean better funding for the place you work in, or everything from workplace safety to, if you're a teacher, for your students. So I think there's a shared prosperity in it, not just the possibility of an even better health plan, but also of the fact that your union is powerful enough to get a good health plan. That doesn't go away if that health plan is replaced tomorrow. Your union still has the power to bargain. If you had the power to bargain for a good health plan, what else could you bargain for in a world where your health plan is provided elsewhere? That there's a whole world of possibilities out there for workers, that we can present that as, if instead of your union having to be a constant firewall just so you can afford medication for your kids, once you can actually fight for things that are better rather than just sustaining what you have, that's actually really exciting too. Scary, but it's exciting.
Labor played a big role in the availability of health insurance.
Yeah.
And that was, pretty much right after World War II, when there was a lot of pressure. Oh, you can't go for big wage increases. That's when the drive and the HIP program and lots of other union-generated health care plans arose. And I benefited from that. My parents were Republicans, so didn't have anything to do with unions, but I had health care while I was growing up because it became such a demand that health care be provided to workers. The other part of that is its problem. It's tied to employment, whereas in Europe and other countries, you had single payer in a national program. So we created a dilemma. We created a structure for health insurance, but it's also a problem instead of being a natural right.
It is funny that after World War II, the entire world was like, we got to figure out some better ways to do things. And everybody else, or almost everybody else, is like, we should just give everybody healthcare. And we were like, we should tie it to jobs. And then for the last 75 years, we've just been like, how can we fuck this up, though? And like, you know what would be great? What if we could make massive profits?
Well, we know several of us are living here in Connecticut. We have the bluest state in terms of our representatives, but does Rosa DeLauro or anybody else, are they for single payer? Of course not.
Well, Steve, I think you're failing to consider the profits. What about, the shareholders, the board member, the board? Think about the board, Steve.
We have Aetna in the state, and that's why we don't have support for single payer.
All right, so we're going to wrap everything up, but I wanted to ask you guys just kind of last thoughts. Like, what do you want to leave us with? And we'll just kind of go in a row. So we'll start with Steve Moser first.
I just say that we need to fight like hell. I'll just leave it at that.
Hot damn right. All right, Steve Thornton.
Everybody talks about how labor has been losing its percentage of unionized workers, and that's been going on since, the 1960s. But I would ask people to look at it in a different way. If we want to change the labor movement or change society without harnessing unions, we'll never do it. But we can change it because there are 16 million workers in this country who carry union cards. Let's say that more than half of them don't know it. That's 8 million people. Let's say only a small percentage, 100,000 people. If we can't organize our workers to be organizers, then there's nothing to do with Trump. It's unions who are afraid of their members or who are business unions. And these are the folks that are the real obstacle. But the potential power is there. It's always been there. I just think there's lots of excuses for not organizing.
Yeah, well, Steve and Steve have both put it very well. So I guess I'll just add in a subsidiary sense, there are a lot of things that makes us feel pessimistic about the present. There are a lot of things that genuinely suck. But also, and this is something I write about in that book, which my takeaway is not going to be you should purchase my book next year because I don't know if I'll have a job, but you should purchase my book next year because I don't know if I'll have a job. But one of the things that inspired me to write it is that capitalists have given us a very pessimistic vision of what they call human nature, that all we can do is compete. All we can do is sort of have these competitive market exchanges that, even our modern conception of selfishness itself, or the idea that people are only motivated by material incentives, that has a real specific institutional history. And so what I'm trying to say is, and it's, full of very bad, very rich people. And so what I'm trying to say here is the things that might give you pause when you hear, well, you can build a union, we can change the world together. There's a sort of built-in cynicism of, yeah, but what about all the selfish people around me? What about all these ways that the world sucks? Those barriers we have to action have been put in place for a reason. They've been developed over a long period of time to convince us that we can't do better. And we can. And this, because in your everyday life, nobody acts like a healthcare CEO does in terms of ruthlessly optimizing your ability to profit off of the people around you. Like most of us, if you ask yourself, why do you do the things you do in your everyday life? You do it because you care for the people around you. You do things because there are things you enjoy. And sure, we have material concerns, but we are so much more than that. And I think the labor movement is an opportunity for all of us together to sort those material needs so that we can build a world where we are free to act on all of those other concerns and build a better world together. It's possible. People have done it before, and we've benefited so much from their partially completed efforts. We can keep building that edifice together.
Wow. All right, Kim, you want to take it home?
Well, in the great ongoing war between good and evil, labor and capital, the bosses and the workers, don't forget there are more of us than there are of them. So don't give up.
And I would just like to add some closing words.
Sure.
As I was saying earlier, once profit is maximized, the important part is consolidate as much power at the top as possible, because what will then happen is that the profit, the success, it will sort of, I guess you could say, trickle down to each individual. Like, it's important that your boss gets his third boat, because someday you're going to get to ride in maybe like the hull. You could be in the hull of a yacht. yacht. You're not a window room, okay? You're going to be in a closet in a yacht, and that's what life is all about. So I think, everybody's made some very convincing points, but I, again, cannot stress this enough that please think about the bosses, the board, the shareholders, and and this is a both sides podcast.
Andrew, your image of the boat is scarily close to what the Middle Passage, which is where millions of workers did actually have to come to this country involuntarily, because that's the way they got here from slavery.
Oh,
And
when you put it that way, I feel less confident in my point. You know what? I'll switch it up. I will say that though there are many problems facing us, most of the reasons why your life is as good as it is because at some point in the past, people got together and fought against those in power. And that's the only way things change. And that's the only way the things we want to change now will change in the future, is if we get together and fight. So, you know what? I'm done. I'm changing my story. Fuck the bosses. Fuck the boat. Let's get together and fight.
you're forgiven.
I've really had my mind changed today.
Yeah, I'm so sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming here and being with us. Thank you to the audience who decided to watch us process recording tonight. For anybody who's listening on any of the streaming services in the future, because this is past Sophia talking, not present Sophia. I don't know what present Sophia is doing. And of course, check out our Patreon. And yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be thankful we didn't bring Miller and Bannon with us, the Steves.
Oh, the evil Steves. They're your next episode, right?
I would tune into a podcast that was Steve and Steve versus Steve and Steve.